Hello, and thank you for all attending. It's great to have you here. So I'm here today to do a webinar on the benefits of investing in enterprise performance. I'd just like to start with a bit of an introduction to myself. So my name's Jared Thomas. I'm working for a company called CAMS. We're based in Vancouver, but we're also global, so Australasia, New Zealand, we're in the UK, all over the show really. So you might be able to tell from my accent already that I'm not from around here, so I was transferred over from New Zealand. My role prior was the General Manager of New Zealand for CAMS, and before that I worked for local government, so I was a project management advisor. Some of the key roles I looked after there was a portfolio where we were trying to improve strategic management and project management maturity. So kind of a symmetry for what I'm doing with CAMS at the moment. So since working within the local government, I've actually worked with numerous other organisations, increasing maturity in a number of areas. So the experience I've gained from that, combined with a whole bunch of white papers that I've done research on, is effectively what you're going to see in this webinar today. Really happy to answer questions at the end, and feel free to post them throughout the course of the webinar. So firstly, we're going to look at what the key performance management areas are. So there's 8 of them. I'm going to provide an overview and any critical aspects that they encompass. It's really great to understand them individually, but we also need to know how they all link together. So I'm going to guide you through a management integration model. Not sure, you might have seen my blog, which covers it at an extremely high level, but we're going to go through it in a bit more detail. We're going to look at how we can increase maturity, and we're going to look at what best practice organisations are doing in each of these areas and what are the benefits that they're going to receive. We're going to have a little takeaway. So what I want you to think about throughout this webinar is why you go to work, what does your company need you to do, and what are you trying to do while you're at work. And I'll give you a hint, the answer's the same for everybody, and I'll elaborate on this at the very end. So key performance management areas, there's 8 areas that make up the enterprise performance management model, all of which contribute unique attributes to the model overall. I'm going to go through them in a bit more detail. I just want to make it clear that these aren't in any order of importance. I've just put them in an order which helps me explain them a bit better. So it's really going to depend on your organisational requirements as to what's most important to you. So first of all, we've got strategic planning and performance management. Strategic planning is an activity that is used to set organisational priorities, focus energy and resources, strengthen operations, ensure that employees and other stakeholders are working towards common goals, establish agreement around intended outcomes and results, and assess and adjust the organisation's direction in response to a changing environment. So it's a disciplined effort that produces fundamental decisions and actions which are going to shape and guide what your organisation is, who it serves, what it does, and why you do it. So effective strategic planning is going to articulate not only where your organisation is going, but also the actions that you need to do to make progress, and also how are you going to know that you are successful. So let's look at some key outputs. What you're going to get is a strategic plan, you're going to get business plans, you're going to have a register of key actions that you need to complete, and you're going to have a register of performance metrics. So what this creates is a strategic framework. It's a comprehensive picture of your organisation's strategy. It's going to clarify how individual efforts and team projects can be connected to achieve the best outcome for your organisation. It's going to include meaningful targets, measures, and sequence of activities that will help focus on key efforts on how you're going to implement the strategy. So some of the key activities that you'll be doing in this area might involve developing your strategic priorities and outcomes, creating strategies on how you're going to achieve these. It's going to include business planning cycles to define your departmental objectives and their key objectives. And you're going to be developing progress, well, you need to be giving progress updates on your key actions and metrics. And of course, there's going to be executive oversight. The next area is financial planning and budgeting. So we've identified our actions. What we can start doing now is looking at operating costs, capital costs, and establish a financial plan. It's also going to enable us to start looking at budgets for future years. So where are we going to need additional funding? Those types of questions can be answered. So a well-constructed operating budget will demonstrate in numbers the organisation's commitment to fulfilling its mission. It's going to be based on reliable income projections and expense projections. It needs to be well researched, conservative and thorough. And some key outputs we're going to get obviously our operating budget, general ledger and capital budget, which is going to cover all our project costs. Some key activities you're going to be doing is creating the budget or the budgeting process. We're going to be doing cash flow forecasting and financial metric development, so non-financial performance measures as well. Next we have my favourite area, the 3 PMs. So project management's unique in that it touches on a lot of performance management areas, but it's at a bit more of a granular level. So they call these the project management knowledge areas, if you're familiar with PMBOK. Project management, though, it focuses more on project objectives rather than strategic objectives, but projects should be undertaken to help achieve strategies. So, for example, a strategy might be made up of a whole bunch of projects as well as operational functions, and you can then have a performance linkage from the project to that strategy and start tracking how your strategy is progressing. Programs are a rigid set of similar or interdependent projects. And portfolios, they're a bit more malleable. So, for example, an enterprise portfolio is everything that the organisation is doing, but the strategy I mentioned before, which is made up of projects and operational functions, that could also be considered a portfolio as well. Right, so some key outputs from this area, we want performance reporting, obviously the deliverables. So a project is going to provide a unique product or a service, and we need documentation, so records, what was the justification, were there any changes to scope, as-builts, lessons learned, that type of stuff. Key activities, obviously we're going to need to do resourcing, scope, time, cost, quality management. We need to do communication activities, risk management, procurement, stakeholder management, and it's at this stage where we can start doing some evaluation of importance and start prioritising projects. Next we have the governance, risk management and compliance. So there's two solid foundations that keep any organisation functioning, policy and process. So one's the rule book and one's the user manual, so to speak. So formal structure is required to ensure that continuity is maintained, and there should be some sort of audit type function which will make sure that we're complying with that. So linking with this is risk. So how does a new threat impact our current governance structure? Well, they can lead to significant changes just to ensure that the risk is mitigated and continuity is prosperous. There's some key outputs in this area. So we need a risk management framework. We're going to have a governance structure and a compliance process. Some key activities. obviously risk management. We're going to be doing identification of risk, assessing, mitigation, monitoring, and of course reassessing. And then there's also audits to ensure that compliance is achieved. The next area is stakeholder engagement. So this is the process where your organisation involves people who may be affected by the decisions that you make, or people that can influence the implementation of any project. So they're not necessarily for or against the project, but they could be influential in the outputs. So for a municipality, this could be engaging with the community that's going to be receiving the outputs of the project. So this really includes asking what your customers want. Some people call it stakeholder management, stakeholder engagement, same sort of thing. What this does is it really sets premise for why your organisation exists. So what are the key outputs? We're going to get a list of actions, products, services, and concerns. That's going to enable us to develop some accurate requirements on what we need to deliver. We also need to ensure that we're getting stakeholder acceptance on what we say we're going to deliver. So some key activities are meetings, surveys, and provision of reporting and dashboarding. So that could be something that you put up on your company website. Next area is business intelligence. So the goal of business intelligence is to allow easy interpretation of large volumes of data. Data can come from multiple sources and be collaborated and presented in a logical, beneficial manner that's going to allow you to make better business decisions. So some outputs are reports, which are accurate, and dashboards, which are live. Key activities, what you're going to be doing is establishing what you need, finding and cleansing source data, populating the data warehouse, and extracting, applying calculations to, and presenting that data, transforming it into information which you can then produce reports from. So these are a lot of internal functions. So what we need then is human resources to undertake these tasks. So finding the right person for the position and getting them to maintain or exceed performance is part of what talent management is all about. But it also focuses on individuals' development and their development goals. So some outputs of this area. We're going to get performance information on the individuals. We're going to get knowledge on the skill gaps. We're going to have an overarching organisational training plan, and hopefully we get some competent staff out of it as well. Some key activities, defining job descriptions, staff classifications, undertaking performance reviews, and identifying training requirements. The last area, because actions and metrics don't always exist where your organisation is an independent, you may be working with other organisations or multiple on a project, or you may have a metric that depends on other organisations updating it to make some sort of calculated KPI. So what collaboration's about is the mutual communication. What this can help organisations achieve is benchmarking across companies. So say there is a KPI for a county for time to respond to a dog attack. Using benchmarking, you can see high performers, low performers. So it may be beneficial where you can see there's an opportunity for shared services where low performers need help. Maybe it's just that another organisation is doing something better, so you can share learnings. Or maybe it's just going to indicate that, hey, we need more staff. So those are the 8 key performance management areas. Let's have a look at how they all should link together. So it all begins with stakeholder engagement. This is going to define what we need to do. what are our stakeholders' goals and what are the specifications for actions. With that information, we're going to undertake strategic planning. How is our organisation going to achieve their goals and develop our own goals internally? We're going to do business planning and develop action plans. On those action plans, we need to set measures and we need to monitor performance. And it's a two-way stream, so that performance is going to be given back to the stakeholders. Once we have our action plan, we can start defining budgets, do financial planning, start doing forecasting, all that sort of good stuff. We then move on to the 3 PMs. So we know how much the projects are going to cost. We know, how much we can afford to do. We need to start prioritising. So we need to evaluate, based on the stakeholders' needs, which are most important and which ones we can afford to do. So there's a strong linkage between strategy, finance, and project. So it kind of looks like that. But because we've got this prioritised list of projects, that's going to reinform strategy. So we may have had a strategic plan to undertake a whole bunch of initiatives, but we can't afford to do it. So we need to give that information back. So that's going to adjust or tweak our strategic plan. Once that's been consulted, we can then start assigning talent. So we need humans to undertake this work. So that's where talent management fits in. But it's important to remember that these 4 processes all interact. So obviously employing staff is going to cost money. Changes in project are going to affect your strategy. Changes in strategy are going to affect everything. So there's that interdependency while it's a cyclic process. Overarching all of that, we have our governance and risk and compliance. They should be applied to all of our internal processes. Once our organisation's got that established, we can then start building business intelligence, getting outputs, performance data. And because we're not doing things in isolation, we need to be working in a collaborative manner. And because we're getting this business intelligence, we can share that with our stakeholders, which completes the circle, so they can see what we're achieving and guide us on where we need to be heading for future strategic plan development. So there's 2 key areas, the internal management processes and engagement and reporting processes. So that's more about external management, both very important. So increasing maturity, what do we need to do? Well, first we need to define what we do in each of these key areas, and then we need to start looking at how do we make it better. So what I want to take you through now is what best practice organisations are doing and what benefits are they getting from doing it. So let's start with just going through some reminders. It's really important that you're scaling it to the size of your organisation. So, for example, you wouldn't expect a company that makes umbrellas for cocktails to be doing huge amounts of risk management. I'm sorry, I'm receiving another call. Send to voicemail. Okay. You wouldn't expect them to be doing risk management to the same sort of level as a company manufacturing nuclear warships. So it's really important that it's scaled to size and requirements of your organisation. And it's also really important that it's governed. So executive support is essential for increasing maturity. So let's take a look at planning performance and metrics. So this is best practice. With strategic targets, constant improvement is the name of the game. So build a set that challenges business as usual and ensure that you're always looking for a more efficient way of doing things. You need to create a flexible planning process because customer requirements, they're always going to be changing, and you need to be agile enough to change with them. Everyone needs to be on the same page when it comes to what the organisation wants to achieve. So communication of your strategic direction should be formal, and the information needs to be readily available. Strategic thinking should also take place at the business unit level. So developing business plans for achieving strategies at a level that's going to put emphasis on strategic thinking. From past implementations, I know that this can take guidance or training, but the end result is an organisation that's going to work towards the same goals. So in best practice, organisational strategic planning and business planning are well defined, and staff understand the difference between them. The importance of strategic planning is understood, and recognition is given to the importance of it. In order to gain time savings and reduce frustrations, it's important to establish a simplistic approach across reporting and documentation processes. Ensure that it's not too difficult or frustrating for staff to be doing this. Strategic execution is everyone's responsibility. So this means that the planning portion should also include everybody's input. Understanding what needs to be achieved and having responsible staff define how they will achieve it will lead to greater engagement and a higher chance of overall success. The strategic framework is essentially the structure that allows insight into your performance. So it should be flexible, but it needs to be adhered to as well in order to make the outputs valid. So what would you be gaining by doing these best practices? You're going to help meet your customer expectations, align requirements with strategic direction and actions. You're going to give your organisation a direction, purpose, and objectives. So this is going to provide a base for performance measurement and staff purpose and build scope boundaries for decision making. It's going to allow the allocation of budget and resource to priority areas. This is done by providing clarity on what needs to be achieved. Because you are delivering your customers' requirements, there is a better chance that they will want return business, and so that's going to increase your chances of longevity. You're going to establish how and why you are different, better, or more unique to your competition or similar organisations, which is going to provide justification and purpose for why you exist. It's going to allow you to achieve goals at strategic levels as well as operational levels, which is going to increase engagement of your staff. It's going to make them more satisfied in their roles, and therefore you're going to have greater chance of staff retention. So you're not losing your IP. So what are the leaders doing in financial planning and budget management? Well, there's no point in aligning resources and financials to projects or operations that aren't going to align with your strategic plan. So if this is occurring, they're helping the organisation follow the chosen direction, and therefore, why are they doing that work? It's a pretty common problem. So I know of a job where a town required a significant wastewater treatment line upgrade. The plan was to set it out in 2 stages. An initial line would go in, and then in 10 years they were going to put in a larger line to allow for growth. The trouble is they didn't undertake proper stakeholder engagement, so they hadn't consulted with the developers or hadn't planned thoroughly for the growth or the volume increases. So almost as soon as the first line was complete, the second line was required due to the growth which they hadn't scoped out properly. Had they properly engaged and scoping been done, larger infrastructure would have been put in to start with. That would have resulted in cost savings, so reduced effort, but also frustration. So the public get to endure, twice the project duration they should have. So having a process that allows you to scope better is going to enable you to plan better, which is going to let you budget better. Very important to have that process in place. Financial measures paint just part of the story as well. So non-financial measures are going to allow you to track other aspects such as expectations, change, satisfaction, accuracy, just to name a few. If there's a significant change on a large project, it could cause budget blowouts. But if that change is approved, for me to proceed, I can take the additional funds. It's essential to know where that funding is going to come from. So I'm going to look at my project prioritization list. I'm going to see, because I need to take $200,000, this project's going to drop off the bottom. What is the impact of that happening? And are my stakeholders going to accept that? In order to track finance at a strategic level, it should be aligned to your planning hierarchy. The value add of tracking dollars based on cost centers that do not align with metrics, you're going to get minimal value out of it. Use of driver-based budgeting. So this budgeting that's structured using models of underlying business activities that derive financial data. So an example, a call center receives 50 calls per day. A call takes on average 20 minutes. That's going to translate to about 16 hours, which requires 2 staff. This requires 2 workstations at a cost of X per station and X per staff. Our call center assets require X budget. So it's really understanding the drivers behind the costs. Budgeting should also be done the same level of detail as your forecasting requirements. So it's going to allow comparative analysis, and that can actually be used as a performance measurement metric. Also, best practice organizations are doing budget cycles every 5 to 8 months. And by removing the requirement for manual intervention, performance metrics can be seen in real time. We'll cover that in more detail when we get to the BI section. So let's look at what benefits do we get. So we're going to get improved visibility by comparing budgets and forecasts to actuals, which are based on the same elements. Priority projects are the ones that are going to be conducted, so our stakeholders are going to be happier. We're going to know what drives our business. It's pretty important, right? Revising the budgets as required will ensure that there's no surprises at the end of the year. Because we're aligning not to the chart of accounts, but to our planning hierarchy, we're going to be able to start tracking strategic costs. We're going to be able to start tracking not just projects, programs, portfolios, but how is our goal overall tracking? We're going to expect time savings, better estimates, we're going to have an up-to-date budget, and improved forecasting and performance outputs. Excuse me. So what about the 3 PMs? Best practice. Let's think about why we are undertaking the project. Remember, projects should be undertaken to achieve strategic objectives. So they have to align with strategy. But it's also needs to be prioritized based on what our customers need. So remember my wastewater line example. Frameworks or workflows should be scalable. Is it a high-risk project? Is it a high-cost project? Is it important to the public? It should be considered whether a large amount of rigor needs to be applied to the project or whether a lesser amount is adequate. You don't want to undercook a big cake, and you don't want to overcook a small one. You need to ensure that performance rolls up and reporting is accurate. Not to mention projects are carried out in a professional manner, which is why we need to ensure that the corporate framework is adhered to. Documentation allows for automated reporting. So what this one's about is keeping everything in a centralized repository. So, we might have a risk management plan for a project on someone's C drive. That's not going to allow me to pull out a report in a timely manner. I'm going to have to go to them, ask them to pull out current risk updates. I'm going to have to compile that into a report. If we're putting everything into the same database, it's going to allow us to generate reports in a much simpler manner. Right, so we'll be honest, we all make mistakes. But the biggest mistake you can make is to not learn from your historic ones. So lessons learned for similar projects need to be incorporated in future projects. And if you can, incorporate learnings from other organisations. Change happens, but it needs to be managed, so having a formal process is going to enable you to do that, which is going to result in less scope creep and cost savings eventually. It's important that the governance structure you set up for your projects or portfolios is going to allow them to be completed easily. I've been in situations where the governance structures actually burden the project. So it's really important to get that set right. And best practice, what do? They plan. So it's critical, yet it's often not done. So I remember a case when an asset team provided a paragraph of scope to a design team. The resulting impact was that it was redesigned 3 times, and the design cost was almost as much as the implementation. It's essential that planning is done before we carry on into future phases. So if we undertake these, what can we expect? Again, we're going to proactively meet our customer expectations. Because we're doing project management well, we're going to have an increased chance of project success. Because we're delivering what our customers want, we're going to have an enhanced relationship with them. We're going to save money, we're going to save time, there's going to be less defects, variations, and wasted resource, which means our productivity is going to be increased. And because we're saving money, and because productivity is increased, at the end of the year, we're going to be able to turn around more projects. And that's really great to report to your stakeholders. We did more than what you wanted. Next we have governance, compliance, risk. Right, so think about how do you do risk management in your organisation? Just like with the 3 PMs I mentioned earlier, it's really important to set out a plan, ensure that the plan is followed and it's going to meet the requirements of your organisation. You need to identify risks based on your risk management framework at a project, operational or strategic level, and you need to do it continuously. Issues, they're not going to wait for you to do it. Once they are identified, they need to be analysed. This typically involves a consequence versus likelihood approach, but can get far more in depth based on risk requirements. We need to decide then, what are we going to do to prevent the risk? What are we going to do if the risk occurs? Again, there's no point keeping risks in a spreadsheet on your C drive. Effective communication of them to appropriate parties is going to ensure that your mitigation plans are effective. Monitoring risk is an essential component. Have the mitigations worked? Do staff need help developing effective mitigation plans? Update and educate them. Regulations change. This can be caused by legislation, stakeholder requirements, these other circumstances. Your framework needs to be rigid but capable enough of being dynamic to cope with regulation change factors. Okay, so back to my example of organisation producing umbrellas for a cocktail, it's going to have a much less stringent requirements around risk than an organisation building nuclear warships. So your framework needs to cover the types of risks you're likely to encounter. So it needs to be scaled to your organisation size and requirements. Strategic, operational and project risk, they're all interdependent. Think about if there's multiple projects that have the same risk, it's probably going to inform a new strategic risk. A new strategic risk might cause a change in strategy, and this might cause the need for new projects or a change to your governance structure, and then there's going to be additional project risks. So it's important to realise that relationship. Simplifying risk management is going to ease your resource requirements on your organisation. So use of technology for automation can save resources and time, and therefore cost. And as with our other frameworks, it's important to adhere to them to ensure consistency and accuracy. What are the benefits of undertaking best practice risk, governance and compliance? Exactly that. We're going to comply with international standards. So it might not be a legal requirement now, but it might be in the future. Consider being prepared. Like I mentioned earlier, you need to be dynamic enough to cope with those factors. There's going to be a reduction in operational and project losses. You're going to be preventive, not reactive. So it's the age old saying, do we put an ambulance at the top of the cliff, bottom of the cliff, or a fence at the top? You're going to be complying with your policies. So the rule book's going to be being followed. You're going to have a reduction in lost time injuries, reduction in negative impacts on your reputation, and an effort overall. Okay, so stakeholder engagement, best practice. So best practice organisations are spending time where it counts here. Having an established process is going to allow you to define when and how engagement takes place. So it's going to allow you to better define and therefore meet the requirements of your stakeholders. Your organisational outputs should mirror the work required to deliver your stakeholder requirements. So think about a company like Apple, for example. They make iPhones and they sell extremely well. Why is that? It's because they're giving their customers what they want. Faster apps, greater resolution, better cameras. Now they've aligned their product with their customer requirements. Compared to some of the competition, so exploding batteries weren't exactly what stakeholder wanted, so engagement dropped off and reputation may be hard to recover. So what are we trying to achieve? Our goals or the customers? They really should be mirroring each other's. Provision of reporting is a great way to maintain engagement. It doesn't matter if the product's a phone or a water treatment plant. Whether they're good or bad reports, maintaining engagement is going to ensure that there's no surprises at delivery and ensure that your relationship is consistent. Whether you're a municipality or a healthcare organisation, accurate identification of stakeholders is going to ensure you get the right information to the right people. And it's, again, that no surprise environment can project closure. The use of collaborative technology, this can range from things like mail merges to providing a dashboard of metrics and performance data on your website. Scope is well defined and followed well. It shouldn't be an issue to gain acceptance of the outputs, but it should be done to maintain relationships for future initiatives anyway. And each project where the corporate framework deems so should develop stakeholder management plans. What do we get if we follow these best practice examples? Well, we're going to be proactively meeting customer expectations, which is why our organisation exists. We're going to have a clear definition of our direction, purpose and objectives. Because we're doing the projects that our customer wants to be done, we're going to have a greater chance of doing successful projects. And because we're doing successful projects, it's more likely that our company is going to succeed. So there's going to be an increase in customer satisfaction. And if we're providing reporting or dashboarding, there's going to be increased transparency, so it's that no surprise environment. And also we're going to get an understanding of the bigger picture. Why do small tasks need to be undertaken for a community? Why is fixing a certain pothole for a certain date important? You get to see the bigger picture. So, talent management. Best practice. Who do you employ? Do you employ people who have qualifications, or do you employ people who have proven that they can help deliver your strategic objective? Most of the time it's a combination of both and very hard to determine. So it brings us to the second point there. Talent managers need to be trusted. They're specialised in the area, so best practice organisations are allowing their HR teams to actually recruit like they should be. So the use of competency models, staff classifications is also growing in popularity. If a manager or a team leader leaves your organisation, it makes sense to have someone there to fill the spot. Who has been working in the environment historically? So development of staff beyond their job capacity is a real useful factor. Leading organisations are investing in value earners. This is because they realise the organisation will not gain value without them, and they want to encourage them to stay. So the people on the ground making the money. Right, so best practice organisations understand the difference between someone who's ready to fill a role, someone who could potentially fill a role, and someone whose performance says that they can fill the role. You need to align people with jobs, not roles. So jobs should overarch the underlying role. I used to be a project management advisor, but my role encompassed strategy, portfolio management, process review, and a number of support functions. So the roles didn't matter, but the job functions did. There should be internal development programs, internal training, and we want to reduce time and gain valuable insights by using tools to support personnel reviews. What do we get following best practice? I've got an actual metrics there, metric from one white paper, 15% higher earning than your peers. Sounds great. We're going to increase our company value by increasing our talent. We can have an increase in engaged staff, which is going to lead to an increased success rate of projects and operational functions, which is going to make our customers happy, which is going to make our teams higher performing. And so because we've got a higher performing team who's all happy, we're going to have increased staff retention, so we're not going to lose our IP again. All right, so let's look at business intelligence. Best practice BI shows you multiple ways of seeing performance. For example, tracking strategic initiatives, being able to drill down and see the underlying projects, and then the tasks, and then the people, and then showing progress and financial data at each level. It's going to enable you to be a better manager. So you can see the roadblocks, you can support the staff, and you've got adequate information which is going to give you justifications on why you made those decisions. So you're not operating on gut feel. your decisions are based on metrics. So single metrics used to update multiple areas. So you might have a strategic plan, for example, but then you might have a whole bunch of additional plans underneath it with the same KPI. You don't want to have to be updating all those individual plans. Business intelligence is going to allow you to update the KPI once, which is going to then branch out into all those other areas. Best practice, it's available anytime, anywhere. I want to see performance on my cell phone because constituents come up to me in the street. Should be able to. It's really important that when you're undertaking a business intelligence initiative, that you're not just getting everything you can, you're getting what you need. So you really need to have a clear definition on scope of requirements of what you need your reports to be saying. They should be configurable by the person using it. Real funny one, best practice organizations actually use their business intelligence. Data can be viewed spatially, and we want a data warehouse to be established, which is going to pull in and cleanse all of our data from multiple sources. Might be our CRM, health and safety suite, all those types of things. So we've got that central repository. What are the benefits? So we're going to be aligning our organization to its key objectives. We're going to enable faster and fact-based decision making. We're going to be combining multiple sources of data. So it's going to enable you to make better decisions based on, facts. You're going to obtain important business metric reports wherever and whenever you need them. You're going to gain valuable insight into your customers' behavior, streamline your operations, benchmark performance across historic years, and forecast for the future. Sorry if you're seeing my notifications pop up. Which leads us to the final area, which is collaborating with others. So best practice, everybody's got to be on the same page with collaboration. So targets are set, they're understood, and they're measured by everybody. It's important that we have that central repository again where everybody's putting the information, so everybody goes to the same place for the source of truth. We don't want to be having to rely on people's C drives again. It's important that the strategies between the organisations also align. So it's not extremely important for one person and it doesn't matter for someone else. We want to be working towards the same goal. Communication needs to be frequent and simple. I'll jump down one. We also need to provide both a formal and informal means of communication. So the methodology of how we're going to take this collaborative approach needs to be planned, much like our other processes. We need to have an inclusive view of end users and their requirements, and integration of systems can really help with providing automated reports. And we want to be getting our skilled staff to be, front runners. So getting the people who know how to do collaboration well. Obviously, you want them to be your managers. What are the benefits? Again, we're going to be proactively meeting our customer expectations. We're going to have a higher rate of innovation, enhanced customer experience, increased individual productivity, because we're not messing around in a whole bunch of different systems. We're going to have a reduced environmental impact. We're going to have improved information quality and a reduction in travel costs. So those are, I guess, the best practice, well, kind of a top 10 best practice in each area. There's a range of other things But these are sort of the, if you were to do a ratio diagram, this would be the 20 that gives you the 80. So if only there was a way we could bring this all together. One of my roles is actually to do maturity assessments in each of these key areas and help organisations develop, a business case or recommendations report on how we can mature in these areas. And CAM's fundamentally, we drive maturity in these areas. So, you've got my number. The takeaway. So why do you come to work? I'll tell you a story of when I was just a young chap. I was working in civil construction, building a bridge. And one day my foreman turns to me and says, so why do you come to work? And I said, well, I'm here to build a bridge and then I'm going to get over it. And he sort of looked at me and laughed and he said, no, you've missed the whole picture. And I didn't understand it, so I went home, I thought about it, and I came back to him the following week and I was like, what did you mean by that? He said, well, you don't come to work to build a bridge. You come to work because the community needs to be mobile, which got me thinking at a higher strategic level. When, I was much more appreciative of my role, and, that's exactly what it's all about. So I hope you can take that away and apply it somehow to your life. And I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So feel free, there haven't been any questions posted, but if you'd like to ask anything, go right ahead. Otherwise, really appreciate your time and feel free to keep in touch.